Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Carlton People. Today I've got, I would say, one of the early adopters of the Blue Abroad YouTube channel, Peter. What a pleasure to have you here, mate.
Hi, Terry. How are you? And hello to everybody from the Blue Abroad family who's watching.
Man, I'm good. I'm excited for this one because I've spoken to you a little bit, and I know that you've got plenty of memories and plenty of stories, and a lot of perspective to give. And I'm really keen to dive deep into your story.
Thanks, Terry. Well, look, it's an interesting story. I'm going to tell it in three parts. I was born into a Carlton family in Melbourne. Probably the funny thing was my dad's family were North Melbourne, almost North Melbourne royalty. I had a cousin who played in the grand final of the old VFL. I have some family connections to the great Sid Barker, who their Best and Fairest award is named after. But my father was estranged from his family, and I think my mother, and so we shared that in commentary. My mother was the person who got my dad into Carlton and ultimately got all the family into Carlton. Something about mothers and Carlton, isn't it?
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. So how exactly does that play out?
Well, when I was born, football was a completely different animal. My family, Carlton were a bad team for a long period of time. Probably not as long as the bad period we've all gone through recently, but Carlton weren't a good side. My mum talks particularly about the pre and post-war periods of Carlton, and she gave me all the stories of all the great players, the bloodbath and all that kind of thing. So I grew up with that. My mum and dad, like your mum and dad, ran businesses. They were busy all the time. They didn't take me a lot of football. To be fair, you didn't take kids to football in those days. And I kind of grew up, I knew Carlton was the team, but I wasn't that interested because I couldn't go to games. Mum wouldn't let me go to grounds like Princes Park. So the places I went to football with them was the MCG, because that was safe. And funnily enough, Windy Hill. Because Windy Hill was a really nice crowd of people went to Windy Hill, and Mum felt okay about us going there. So we'd go watch Carlton play Essendon. Essendon were a super team in the 60s, won 2 premierships. They became my second team. I knew all the Essendon players like I knew all the Carlton players. And funny story, Terry, 1968 came around. Carlton played Essendon in the grand final. I'm 11 years old. Mum took me aside and said, look, you're more than welcome to barrack for Essendon. If they win, no one in this house will speak to you. I changed.
She was honest.
Yeah, she was. I changed to Carlton. Carlton won by 3 points. And the rest, they say, is history. I just want to give you a quick picture, Terry, of what footy was like back in those days when you went to them.
Please.
We had 12 teams. All the games were played on a Saturday afternoon, all of them, all 6. They were all played at the same time, 2 till 5. You went to the football. If you could go to the football, because if you played sport on Saturdays, you couldn't get to the footy. If you worked on Saturdays, you couldn't get to the footy. Most people didn't go to the football because they couldn't get there. Everyone listened on radio. If you went to the game, you bought a footy record for $1 and you used it with the scoreboard to see what the other scores were in the other games. They put them up on the scoreboard. So you followed all 6 games simultaneously, like in English soccer. You then got home and you went and watched the one TV replay on the one channel that would feature maybe 2 last quarters of 6 of those games. That was all you saw. And not surprisingly, the footy replays were the big teams. So if you're a small team, you wouldn't see your team even on television. Sunday was the VFA day, and everybody followed a VFA team because you could go to the VFA, and the VFA games were shown on television live. So you could actually watch a game of football. So the funny thing, most supporters of Carlton supported someone else and went and probably watched more games with their VFA friend than the VFL one. And this is the one that will blow your mind, Terry. Imagine going to the football. You don't see any children. You see very few women, and men carry in slabs of beer and drink the beer during the game. They even take 2 slabs in if there's half a dozen boys with a good appetite. You could imagine being in a crowd where people are drinking that quantity of alcohol, and you can imagine what the last quarter's like.
Yeah. It's come a long way. It seems very well. It from the stories that I've been told, there's 2 things. One, footy was you almost had to use your imagination because you weren't able to watch every quarter of every game. So if you were listening on the radio, or if you were catching a highlight, or if you were reading the reports of games in the newspaper, it was more of a game of imagination in your head and a fantasy in your head as to what was happening. And
Yeah.
totally different to now, where you have so much access to your players.
Yeah. And the football experience, I've got to say, when you were young, it was a scary place to go.
Right.
There were fights in the last quarter because everyone was drunk. People used to stand on steel. I mean, people weren't as tall as you and me, Terry. Some people would stand on 6-packs of steel beer cans to see, because everyone was standing shoulder to shoulder. So imagine you've had half a dozen, you've actually had 6 cans of beer, and you're standing on beer cans, and people are leaning up shoulder on shoulder. They're standing on beer cans. You can imagine how it goes in the last quarter. The fights that happened weren't between different supporters. The fights were between supporters of the Carlton team or the Collingwood team. It was a scary place to go. It was fun when you were with your mates, but when you're a kid, it was a scary place to go. And as I say, my mum wouldn't let me to go to Princess Park. I didn't get to Princess Park until my brother took me. And even then, I saw too many fights at Princess Park in those days. Too many.
That's just part of the culture of the sport. Was that how it was?
Yeah, it was very masculine. It was very intimidatory. I suppose you'd call it tribal. It built the kind of story, the kind of, the mythos of football being a tough person sport. But it wasn't welcoming. Football now is, amazing. When I went to the women's football and saw you there with Steph, and just how welcoming football is now.
Mm.
It was not that. It was not that. But it was what it was of its time. So moving the story on, my mum and dad moved to a new house, and I had to change school when I was 16 years old. I suppose you'd probably call it year 11. And so I went to a different school, which was good because it gave me a chance to be a different person and behave and become a good student rather than a bad student. And I met my mate there, Warren, and he was a complete Carlton nuffy. He knew everything. He knew the stats. He knew everything about the game. Loved the game. And we struck it off because he didn't live far from me, and we're mates for the next 50 years. And the central point of our relationship was sport, of course, but Carlton particularly. And once he found out I was a Carlton supporter, then that was it. We were pretty well locked in together. And for the next, we did everything together over the next, the rest of our lives. We grew up together. We went to Carlton games together. Carlton, when Warren and I started to support them, had been through a bit of a dip from the kind of early Carlton that won 68, 70, 72 premierships. Carlton went through a bit of a dip. And then in the 70s, they started to come back. They started to recruit some young kids. Does this sound familiar? They had Alex Jesaulenko as their coach, one of their legends. They went on a big run of games in 1978. Again, similar. They got to their first final. They hadn't moved to a final for a while in 78. And then, of course, that team was the nucleus of the team that won 79, 81, 82. And so that was a marvellous time. And Warren and I had an absolute ball going to games, being ridiculous. And we had a wonderful time. And that continued. And Carlton were a very successful side. And Warren and I interspersed getting married, being best man for each other, travelling around the world, following all kinds of sport, playing sport together. And that was a marvellous, marvellous experience, because then we were going to your footy with your mates. And this is the same experience that you're having. This is when you go to the footy with your mates, when you're there to barrack for your team, and you enjoy it with your friends. It is an amazing experience, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. It doesn't dawn on me that I am living through the best time, even though I'm in my 30s now and starting to really enjoy wins for the first time in a long time. But it's definitely, every time I go to the football, I always take a moment to appreciate being there.
Yeah. And it was great to be back at the footy and just to experience and watch people doing that. It is a unique part of the game. I think it covers all sport, all sports the same way. So Warren and I kind of, we had our golden period through the football, and then the world and the football started to change, because in the early 90s, Warren got a diagnosis that he had the genetic disease called Huntington's disease. It was a big shock to all of us, because I think his dad had it. He had a stepfather when I met him. So we continued on, and Carlton went on to win a premiership in 95, and I was still a pretty good side through the early 2000s. But it was different, because when your closest mate has a fatal disease, then everything changes. But it wasn't going to be, it was going to be a long, slow, lingering farewell. And ironically, Terry, Carlton's decline mirrored Warren's decline. It was just the way it goes, I suppose. That's life. I suppose it is. I was watching the football of life, and I was watching my mate's life.
Wow.
We kept going. He now had a son, and he used to go to the footy with Scott, and I'd go along occasionally and watch them. And Carlton were terrible through those early 2000s, moving into the middle 2000s. And Warren's health was declining. The last game he could go to was the last game that I went to. We lost to Western Bulldogs at the old Marvel Stadium, as it was, and that was his last game where he could drive. He now had to go home and live with his mum and dad, because the disease was getting quite advanced. So he didn't go anymore, and because he didn't go, I didn't want to go. But I went up to see him and his mum and his stepdad, and we talk about Carlton, of course, and we complained about how bad they were. And eventually then he couldn't stay at home, and he had to go into care. So he went into a low-care nursing home, and we decked out his room and all the Carlton memorabilia, and I'd go in and see him. And it was, we kept talking about Carlton. I think this is this is now early Bolton now.
Yep.
And we're going through the list changes and getting rid of all the spuds and picking up all these rejects from GWS. And we're talking about how good they might be, and we know how that went.
Full of hope. Full of hope.
Yeah, full of hope with someone who had none. And anyhow, eventually he had to go into a high care nursing home. Couldn't stand. Was falling a lot. And then the disease slowly took away his speech. So it became a monotone of me going in and talking to him and telling him how bad the team was and how good the team might be, and him just lying there and smiling. Fortunately, I found Blue Abroad. I found this crazy ex-Australian in Tel Aviv talking about Carlton. And there was something in your story that spoke to me. And so I started following you, and Blue Broad gave me Carlton back. Not the same as Warren, but it was pretty good. Warren died just before Carlton started to improve this year. We buried him. His funeral was, of course, the Carlton theme song. And I saw you at the women's football, Carlton Collingwood. And we got onto Princess Park. We scattered Warren's ashes where he wanted to go.
Wow.
And you were there. You saw us. You saw all the people gathering. His son and my sister and my nephew, all these people who grew up with Warren. And we're there to say goodbye.
Yeah, that's well, I think that right there is that is the essence of the Carlton Football Club summarized.
Yeah.
I remember seeing you that day, and it was I don't think I had seen you since the
party at H.
season launch. Yeah.
Yeah, H, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
wow,
it's fantastic. It's you can't believe how good it is for someone my age to see the young people, the women, the passion, but also the great thing you've done is you've made us better supporters. It's not enough to have a good team. It's not enough. You need to be better. And you've done that. You've been huge in changing how supporters support.
Oh, Pete, you've you've stumped me. Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. It's been a journey, isn't it? Initially, it was just about documenting the week to week. The community aspect came later.
Mm.
And, I don't think anyone can be truly prepared for how powerful the Carlton community is. I mean, we see it on game day. I think with the channel, we now get to see it throughout the week. And I think someone with your experience, I mean, you've really seen the full circle of the whole game evolve on field and off field. You know, I mean, you start off in the 60s, as you said, you go through the golden era, you've seen multiple premierships, then you've seen, you know, rebuilds to new premierships. It's really magical to hear you talk about sort of the crossover, you know, with Warren and now the channel and what happens in the future. But mate, thank you so much for sharing. That's a really deep and personal story, and really honored to have that story here, you know. And I know that people will be watching this decades later when both of us aren't around anymore. I think there's just so much more to be excited about now moving forward.
I agree, Terry. I agree.
Would have loved to have chatted with Warren and done one of these with him.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't to be. That's, I mean, that is life, isn't it? That is life.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've done him proud. You've done the team proud, and hopefully, I've told a bit of our story.
Mate, you've done 90 odd episodes in this series, none of them have quite moved me like that one. I think, I mean, we're talking about how many decades? I'm talking about decades long friendship centered around the club and going to the games. Can you cast your mind back to when footy evolved and you were regularly going to the games? And you did mention that in the 90s things started changing.
Yeah, I
Was it?
mean, the thing that was different in football was that Warren and I played sport all the time. And football on Saturdays meant you couldn't follow football. You couldn't. I mean, you couldn't play footy or cricket or tennis and go to the football. You could as a junior. But once you got to 18, 19, 20 and you were playing senior football, senior basketball, whatever, you couldn't go to the footy anymore. And so it became, there was a huge change to move it to even the Sunday, when they moved it to the Sunday, when the Swans when South Melbourne went to Sydney, they moved one game to a Sunday because that was part of the deal when they moved Sydney to Sydney. When they moved south to Sydney, they got their games on Sunday. And suddenly everyone could watch the Swans. And you could imagine the clubs looked at this and said, hang on, why are we stuck to 2 to 5 on a Saturday? And that was the beginning. And once football started to move outside of that, I mean, it was fantastic that all the games were played simultaneously, but it was such a narrow cast.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you're a person who loved playing sport, then the fact that you couldn't go and watch your team, I used to play tennis and you'd have the radio going and you'd be going on and off the tennis court, getting the scores and, or you'd be playing footy and people would have the tranny in the ear watching the local footy team. And you'd be telling the players at quarter time what the scores were in the Carlton game. I mean, it was kind of nice. But what you have now is this deep engagement. People now are invested in they know the players. The players are not just these sort of iconic blokes running around that you kind of don't really feel to people that you watch grow up with you.
So true.
That's completely different. I mean, when I go back to, as a kid back in the 60s, these figures that ran around, the John Nichols and the Wes Lofts, and they were almost Homerific kind of characters you read in they were kind of these kind of heroes, but they weren't. It's odd in some ways. They worked and they played footy. They only trained 2 days a week. They were more like you and I than the ones now who are professional. But the ones now are more approachable because you are more invested in their journey.
Yeah. You know them so well without actually, without having met most of them, you know so much about them.
Yeah. And of course, back in those days, we didn't know anything about these people, which was probably a good thing because, as you know, the footy media back in those days used to keep secrets, which wasn't a good thing necessarily. It was a good thing and it was a bad thing. So we had this kind of idealised view of our heroes.
Yeah.
My dad had a saying to me, which he said was never meet your heroes. And I kind of know what he meant.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point that I think gets missed a lot when I'll see a lot of rhetoric around, the players of today, they're nothing like the players of yesteryear. And that may be true, but the players of yesteryear didn't have to deal with a camera being potentially on them at any point in time.
No.
It's a different kind of pressure.
Yeah. As I said, and it was, I mean, the footy experience was great. It was very tribal. It was always violent. I mean, I used to go to Princes Park with a bunch of mates because at one period of time we had Fitzroy as co-tenants. And I used to go along to watch the Carlton games, but I used to go with my Fitzroy mates along with Warren because a few of them were ex-policemen. And I'd stand with them behind the goals down at the opposite end to the social club, and I felt quite safe with them. There was a time once when I was there with Warren, and Warren was the smallest of the six of us, and the rest of these boys were some big boys. And something happened on the field. I can't remember what it was, and Warren yelled something out. I don't know what it was. It was nothing. He was backing for his team, and this guy was standing in front of Warren. And he basically spun around and said, "You spat on my girlfriend." And Warren's gone, "No, I didn't." "Oh, yeah, yes." And so this guy's going to put a show on for his girlfriend. And this was going to get ugly very quickly. And I just leaned around and tapped one of the big boys on the shoulder and pointed to it. And this guy just leaned over. He's about 6'3" and about 2 pick handles wide. And he just leaned over to the guy and said, "Sit down." That was it. The guy just. That's a funny story. If I hadn't had a 6'4" person with me, it mightn't have ended well. And I was at Princes Park when a guy died.
In the crowd?
Yes, he was a young father who'd gone to the footy with his son, and he was king hit behind the goals, and he died. I think he's the only. I think Princes Park has that honour of. I think we have the only supporter actually killed during a game.
Wow.
It was that and. But that made it exciting, Terry. It wasn't exciting for a good reason, and it was not welcoming. But when you're a young buck, it's kind of the fun. You go with your mates, not quite soccer, but it's on the path to soccer. And that's one of the things I think they did. I think they looked at where English soccer had gone with their hooliganism, tribal stuff, and they said, this is not going to happen in the AFL.
Yeah. What did you make of when the AFL sort of moved away from, that Premier League model where you have your clubs in their suburbs, and then we went to the MCG and obviously Marvel thereafter, and I guess the dream of having the clubs play home games in their suburbs kind of gone for the men's competition anyway. What did you make of that change?
Well, again, it was very sad losing Princes Park because it was. It was just so much, it was so, it was there, when we were scattering Warren, there were so many ghosts. The Malcolm Blight, torpedo from the centre of the ground to beat us and all that kind of stuff. So you lose something. I mean, it was terrible to lose the suburban grounds. Fully understand why it happened for the money and everything else. I've been to England, and I've been to I support Aston Villa, and Aston Villa have an original stadium, and it is so important to still have those things in the modern era. I mean, I understand why American sport go with their purpose-built brand new stadiums. I fully understand how you make more money and all that sort of stuff. But it is so important if you can hold on. I still think there's a possibility that Princes Park comes back. Probably Carlton will never play there again. But I can certainly see a possibility of a smaller suburban ground, not Marvel, not the MCG. It was that last game at Princes Park was the weight that it needed to be. It needed to be something that we all went to and we wished we'd never seen.
Time is undefeated.
Yeah.
And evolution is inevitable.
Yeah.
And then we have this.
Yeah, we do.
We have this new frontier that was created, this digital, almost intangible world that we started living in. and which now connects us to the tangible game on game day.
Yeah.
How did you observe, seeing as much as you have, how have you observed how digital has come in and given the game a totally different element?
Well, again, Terry, I'm gonna pump your tires up again because, and it's your generation doing this. I mean, you're trying to work out how do we use this to both improve the experience of everybody, but at the same time not have it move into almost a more digital feral version of hooliganism. In other words,
Yeah.
the violence that happened on the terraces at Princes Park can easily, and we know how easily it can move across into the spaces of social media. And so your generation and the ones coming after you even, they are building the social norms about the way we use this technology to make both the sport and the consumption of the sport experience as welcoming as it can be for as many people as possible. And it's happening live right here, right now.
You're right. What about, we're filming this at the end of 2023. So we've finally seen the club seemingly turn it around and get themselves back into contention. Do you draw any parallels with what you're seeing now and what you've seen in the past with some of the teams that have risen up?
I suppose, again, the thing is everybody improves. Carlton improved. Congratulations. They were tremendous at the second half of last year. But everybody will be better next year. And all the teams around us will get better. And everyone will bring in new players. And everybody will get a second chance. Which means you start from zero again. You're right. I do look back in the past. The most recent scenario where I think Carlton might be, and I'm not saying I know where Carlton is the Melbourne scenario when they first made a run in the finals and then they fell back. And then they went on to win the premiership the year after. That's one possible scenario for Carlton, is that next year is a kind of, it's not as easy as we thought. We have to do another lot of work. Another scenario, and I'm going to give you scenarios because that's all we've got. The other scenario is this was the beginning. This was like the 78 to the 79, and this Carlton team goes on and wins 3 of the next 4 premierships. So the Mosquito fleet of 78 under Jesselenko turned into the back-to-back of David Parkin. Is the team, has it got enough? I mean, the thing about the 78 team and the 79 team, and there was still a connection and a culture to the great teams of the 70s. There were a couple of players and there was still a winning culture. I'd love to think we're going to win. We're going to do a Richmond and literally just, burst out of the gates and run away with it with dominant players. We could. We might also have that year of just got to work it out. And dare I say it, the other scenario, of course, that I don't like, of course, is the Brisbane scenario. Brisbane, how long have Brisbane been knocking on the door?
True. They've had a 5-year run, 3 prelims and a granny.
Yeah. And again, that happened to Geelong. If you go back to the Geelong team that became dominant, but the Geelong team had, how many times did they get knocked off at the preliminary final before they finally banged down the door? As I say, I don't know. I'm like anyone else. I think, we're a good team. I think there's some good teams around us too. They're good teams too. I don't think there are bad teams. I think there are excellent teams. I mean, that's the other thing that is so different to when Carlton was dominant in the 70s. I mean, Carlton was dominant because they were a ruthless club But most clubs were amateur, the way they went about doing things. Carlton weren't particularly professional, but they had the most money and they were the most ruthless club in the 70s. Where Carlton got into terrible, terrible trouble was everybody professionalised and we didn't. Richmond was slow to become professional and then turned into a juggernaut that they always are. Collingwood, I mean, I just think, it's now teams have to be both excellent on and off. You have to be literally, you have to have, and that's, again, huge plaudits to what Carlton did. I think Carlton's off-field improvement is as much as their on-field improvement. And I think the supporters, did a tremendous job as well. I say, I give high marks to all the elements. But as I say to you, next season, everyone starts from zero again. And everybody thinks they're better.
We have to wait till the very end of the season.
And that's an important thing you said. You said a really important thing this year. I'm going to remind you about it because you said you have to let it happen. Be slow to judge.
It's a lesson learned over time, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Took me a while to get there, but we got there. And I think that's what's probably got us into trouble in my experience as well, because we, because of maybe it was the build-up of the lack of success, lack of finals, and that created more angst within the supporter base, which put more pressure on the club, which didn't have as much stability as what they seemingly do now, which then led to quick fire decisions being made mid-season. And
we want things to be certain, and they are not.
Yeah.
And football is a random sport. The ball doesn't bounce the same way all the time. It's a game that is built on randomness and chance. We want it to be skillful. We want it to be logic-based. And good on you. Game it's a bounce of the ball. Success is literally like poor Stephen Milne running into a goal. If it bounces into his hands, St Kilda win a goal. They win a grand final. It bounced away from him. They lost a grand final. I think football is as much about learning to live with unfairness. And again, bring it back to my mate. Life was unfair to him. Why am I here and why is he not? But that's life. Unfairness is on the tin.
It's a great metaphor for life. It's so true. There's no such thing as true fairness and true equality I think it's a hope.
Yeah, we should be sensitive to things being unfair. And we should be sensitive to reducing unfairness. But the corollary of that is we're not seeking to make things completely fair, because the world doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't. Wow. Peter, this has been I'm so glad we got this done. This has been really good. Thank you so much for your time. I'm a big advocate for those that give up their time. It's very special. I think this is one of the episodes that'll live for a long time, a long, long time. There's a really important story of mateship. I think the essence of the club really shines through in this conversation, and mate, it's just been a pleasure to have you part of the community. And I don't know how you came across the channel, but I'm glad that you did, and I'm glad that we were able to cross paths and just document your story for the future.
Thanks, Terry. It's been a great ride. Been a privilege for me to watch the channel's growth, your growth, and everyone else on the channel. I mean, there's so many talented people that you have attracted onto Blue Abroad, and just where they're going to take themselves and the channel, but also what they're going to do when they start to go out into the world and affect change in the world. Blue Abroad is, yes, it's a fan channel. It's about a football club, but it's actually about changing the world, changing the parts of the world that we can all touch.
Thanks, Pete. Go Blues.
Go Blues.